Past the Isle of Dogs, Tales from the Angel's Share, Volume 5, by Marella Sands. Read by Rett MacPherson. Chapter 1. How does one survive a transatlantic flight? We were only 2 hours into the 7+ hour flight, and I was already going stir crazy. My knees hit the back of the seat in front of me. My elbow was squeezed into my ribcage so that I didn't keep jabbing the guy in the window seat, and the person in front of me had reclined their seat so that I was staring at the top of their partially bald head. Reading a book would have entailed holding the book up right next to my nose or trying to prop it up on the semi-bald head in front of me. Viewing a movie on my phone was pointless because the damn thing was down to 20% power and I had no way to charge it because I had stupidly put the charger in my luggage. So, only 5 hours to go. I glanced over at my traveling companion, Brooklyn. I'd met her a few weeks ago when I'd been investigating a haunted house with my partner Castro and his friend Andre. Brooklyn was Andre's cousin and he'd brought her along. At that time, her hair had been a screaming red. Today it was bright purple. Red highlights occasionally stood out, so I assumed she'd simply dyed the purple on top of the red. The arm tats were covered by her sweater. It was January, and St. Louis was a frigid place at this time of year. I'd never been brave enough to do anything about my hair color. It just stayed mousy brown. Nor had I ever been brave enough around needles to get a tattoo. I didn't even know what I would get. Perhaps a hedgehog in honor of my little Petunia. Brooklyn had earbuds in and looked quite relaxed. I had no idea what she was listening to. I didn't really listen to music myself, so I was also a little bemused as well as surprised when the people around me would prefer to listen to their musical playlist over the sounds of the real world. At least on a plane, I understood the need to drown out some of the noise of the engines. Traveling on an airplane and coach really sucks, doesn't it? Asked the guy on my left next to the window. He asked in a friendly manner, which was nice, because even though I'd tried really hard to keep my elbow to myself, I'd still managed to get a few jabs in unintentionally. Yeah, I said, I've never done it before. I always thought flying internationally would have a little more appeal than this. You've never flown before? He seemed surprised. Not even domestically? I shrugged. Why would I? I don't have family to visit, and I've never that much disposable income anyway. The man nodded slowly, as if truly considering my words. I ran my statement back through in my head, but couldn't figure out what words might have been enough to make someone think about something quite so hard. The man had dark reddish skin, black hair, and dark eyes. He was dressed in a dark gray top and matching pants, unexciting to look at. No doubt business casual. The one odd thing about him was a small, light-colored stick poking out of his shirt pocket. It was carved and had a hole in it, like a small flute. Didn't those have special terms? I wasn't really up to speed on musical instruments and their smaller versions. In any case, talking to this guy would have to be more interesting than staring at the back of the seat in front of me. Traveling for work? He shrugged. Something like that. I travel a lot, but ultimately I would prefer to stay home if I could. What about you? Is it a job that's sending you across the seas and forcing you to fly for the first time? I guess you could say that, I said. I'm a bartender, but my boss is a sort of collector. He wanted someone to go to London to pick up something for him. London's a good place to find nearly anything, said the man. It's a world-class city with nearly everything you could imagine. But a bartender? I always thought that sounded like an interesting job. Is it? I thought of all the chaos in my life in the past few months, but it had nothing to do with bartending. It was just that my boss and his friends had turned out to be immortal creatures called the Forlorn that had most likely given rise to the legends of angels. But the bartending itself? Sometimes, I said. People talk to bartenders, but it's often about pretty boring stuff. Once in a while, someone comes up with something you haven't heard before. Otherwise, it's things like my boss is a jerk, my spouse doesn't appreciate me, the government takes too much of my money, or even worse, they're drunk and want my phone number and won't take no for an answer. The man's eyebrows went up at that. So what do you do? I grinned. My boss sets them straight. They'll find themselves booted out of the place with instructions to never return. Sounds bad for business. Nah, I said. The staff appreciate the backup, and the other customers like to know that rude and abusive people aren't tolerated. Makes for a more pleasant atmosphere. Huh. Never thought about it that way, he said. So what's your boss sending you to London for? I certainly wasn't going to say that it was likely a talisman filled with the power of my boss's race. I just smiled and said, some little silver doodad. I don't even know what to call it, really, but he wrote out a description and said I should search some of the antique shops that someone would have heard of its current location. But he doesn't know where it is exactly, or if it's actually in London? I guess, I said. What can he do if I ask around and no one knows where it is? Nothing. I just go home empty-handed. He sounds eccentric. I shrugged. Oh, you have no idea. He's an oddball, but he pays well and, as I said, won't put up with abusive customers, so it's a good gig overall. That was only a little white lie. The bartending part was a good gig. This being part of some kind of power move on the part of my boss against others of his own kind whom I didn't know, well, that part pretty well sucked. What was I going to do about it, though? I was already involved. Hell, I was probably destined to be involved if what Lucy, who was another Forlorn, had said were true. She thought my involvement was because of some kind of genetic legacy inherited from the first and only human Forlorn cross. I figured that put me in the company of several thousand, if not million, other people, but what would I know? Maybe there weren't that many descendants of that first child of a mixed legacy. My companion fell silent, and I put my head back on the seat, hardly prepared for more hours of pure boredom. I was going to start pulling out my hair before another hour was up. I just knew it. It was a shock when I opened my eyes to Brooklyn telling me we were about to land. I blinked and looked around. Brooklyn was putting away her earbuds. The guy on my left was gone. Hey, Brooklyn, how did that guy get out of his seat without waking me up? I asked. What guy? The guy... I stopped speaking. A small piece of paper lay on the seat next to me. It read, "Nice to meet you. See you again soon." I shivered. I did not like this. I did not like this at all.